Hello and welcome to a new episode of Gestatten Sie. My name is Ulrich Eid and I'm sitting down with all kinds of creatives every week to talk about whatever they're passionate about and whatever they're dealing with in their creative pursuit. This week is a little bit of a different episode, as you can hear. It's one of my first English-speaking episodes. My guest was a great director from the States. His name is Shern Sharma. It was really cool talking to him about his path from studying business to shooting a feature film just recently. And we also talked about the role of luck on this path. He explained his approach to storytelling, the challenges of shooting his first feature film, and why he expects AI might disrupt the industry way quicker than some might think. I think it was a super interesting conversation for me to just hear about his experiences. My English isn't perfect, but just bear with me, I'm trying my best. I hope you can still understand everything and everything makes sense. So yeah, enjoy this episode with Shern Sharma. Hi, Shern.
Hey.
So glad you took your time and to record an episode with me.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure.
Also, I think it's my just second episode talking in English, so it's always kind of hard finding English-speaking guests because they don't really have an understanding on what this podcast is about, and they don't really have feeling or can listen to recent episodes. So thanks for trusting me with your time.
Yeah. What was the first one?
I think it was 4 or 5 years ago with the BMX rider he's originally from Italy, but lives now in Barcelona.
I see. You've been going 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
I think I started 4 or 5 years ago. Then I did that for a year or something, half a year. And then I stopped for 3 years. And then I took it up, I don't know, a little over a year now.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been a fun ride.
All right.
Super interesting medium.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I'm honest. I'm honored to be the second English speaker in your podcast.
Well, let's see how it works.
Try to make it memorable.
For sure. So yeah, would you mind just letting the people know who you are, kind of introduce yourself?
Well, my name is Shern Sharma. I am a director. I work in commercials and I have made a feature film. And there used to be a lot more of an ellipsis to that. You'd say music videos, you'd say short films, da 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 da. But I guess it's all kind of collapsed now into content, which is kind of pathetic. But I think commercials, and then even the narrative work that I do now, which is not feature film, is I guess it's in the sphere called branded content. Mm-hmm. And the good stuff, you're not really supposed to know that it's an advertisement when you're watching it, right? It's it's supposed to just be something that you find interesting or beautiful or compelling in some other way. And then maybe at the end, they throw you a brand card and you're like, oh, that's who paid for it. That's what I'm watching. But that gets a little blurry, right? But I say commercials. That's how I make my money.
When I looked up your website, there was not a single commercial on there.
Yeah.
Is that on purpose because you want to do more of the branded content or feature work?
The way it works, so my website is to give me work, right? And obviously, it's fun for me to be able to share things that I've made with friends and family, but it's primarily a vibe, right? Or I would even say vibe supplemental, because the way I get jobs is my agency, the production company that represents me, they get contacted by advertising agencies or brands, and they say, we'd like to see a reel of Shern's work. We're interested in him as a director. So they have all of my commercials. They have all the work I've ever done, and they craft a custom reel based around the constraints or the parameters of the job in question. And then if the people watching it want to get a better sense of what I'm about or what I do, then they can go on my website, which is more longer form stuff, or on my Instagram and see photos that are supposed to be vibe, because it's people just feeling you out all the time. Mm-hmm. And the more they can see, the more either they will believe in your ability to do it or not do it. So, and the other thing is I don't know how, I like looking at commercials, right? And many of my colleagues like looking at commercials, but like I don't know how interested the average person is.
That's so true.
You know?
I've always like asked myself, like, who are these 2 or 3 minute commercials for?
Yeah.
Who's actually going to sit there for 2 or 3 minutes watching a, I don't know, commercial about whatever product? It's mainly about like people from the industry, I feel like.
Yeah, like a good 30-second commercial or a good 60-second commercial, even up to 90 seconds, they can be incredible. You know, real like I think Stanley Kubrick said something about like some of the best examples of filmmaking you might see, and I think that's very true. But they're also something that you are subjected to rather than that you seek out on your own. Mm-hmm. And I think you know, it's like you get them on a YouTube pre-roll, and it's like I just want to get to the video, or if you have an ad blocker, you don't see them at all. But I very much enjoy making them. They're a lot of fun. And the people that you work with are, you know, generally very smart and have good taste and they want to make something cool. So, you know, I still like them. I just don't have them on my website.
What do you think is the like place of like commercials nowadays? Because as you said, I mean, most people are watching them before a YouTube video. They're just annoyed. They want to get to where they actually want to go. And the commercials just in their way. Do you feel like people are more annoyed at commercials now than they were, I don't know, a couple of years ago?
I don't think it's changed much in the last few years. And I think also it depends where you're consuming your media. Like I don't usually watch broadcast TV, but if I'm, you know, in another country for work and I turn on the TV in a hotel room or something, like I'm watching broadcast TV. Or if I'm back in the US, I have plenty of friends and family who watch broadcast TV. There's wall-to-wall commercials on broadcast TV. There are commercials on in-flight entertainment. There are commercials before you watch a film in the cinema. They're on YouTube. They're on Instagram. They're across social media. They're kind of everywhere. So it's very easy to tune them out, especially if it's not you didn't click on them, you didn't want to watch them. But I think it's also the job of the advertiser to make something that's compelling or at least catchy or like funny, just to have some value. And, you know, there's like plenty out there that are not going to speak to you at all. I mean, it's like selling anything, right? Like if you're looking for, I don't know, a very specific sale and Walmart or Target makes a 30-second thing that is not sexy at all and it's not supposed to be, and it's cheap and it just says, hey, socks are half price this week. Like it works very well. If you want to make an esoteric commercial about, I don't know, a car fighting the winds for Subaru, it's like somebody might find it compelling, especially if you're kind of leaning in that direction already, because I guess it builds on the mythology you have in your head of that brand. So that's kind of fun, but really like it's generally speaking, just cool budgets to play with things that you wouldn't normally do.
Are commercials a way for you to like try new stuff? Or you have like the budget to actually do more creative or more like out there things?
To a point. I mean, people get nervous, right? Like I'll just use these examples, right? You can make a small film for $1 million. You can make a small commercial for $1 million. The film is maybe 2 hours long. The commercial is 30 seconds. That's a lot of money per, I don't know, frame or per second of screen time, right? And for many companies, that's not even that big of a budget. That's just the cost of doing business. Now, they still have to show their work to their superiors, right? And oftentimes, you know, you get copywriters and creative directors and art directors who are pretty young and like pretty driven, and they want to do something really cool. But then, you know, the people they work for are like a little older, still kind of there, but like maybe moving in a different direction. And then their bosses, and then their bosses. By the time you get to like a senior executive at a big brand, they don't give a shit. Like they play it very safe. So you have to, if you want to do something that's like very different, you really have to sell it up front, like during the pitch. And maybe you have to have examples so that they're not totally banking on an unknown quantity.
Example of how it could work, or how it worked somewhere
You have
else.
to sell it to them.
Yeah.
Or you have a really good producer who buys you time in the shoot and you can just do the thing and show it to them later, which happens, you know.
So you have to be like close friends with the producers.
Yeah, I mean,
They have your back.
absolutely.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. They buy you the time. They distract them. They do a thing. You do it. And then you show it to them. They go, oh, that's really cool. Or they go, nah, we're not into it.
Yeah.
You got to take some risks.
For sure.
Yeah.
Were commercials your kind of stepping stone into the industry, or
Well,
how did you get there?
most people, and I wonder how specific this is, right? Like I went to film school after I went to university. I studied business and I studied philosophy. And then I began law school before I realized that was not going to be a good idea for me. And I think most people, when they begin their studies, they have only a vague sense of where they want to take things. Like I was speaking to someone the other day who is just finished a master's in some music related field. Like I might have just been like classical composition, right? And I said, well, what are you going to do now? I said, well, I'm considering doing my PhD. Now, when I hear someone tell me that they're going to do a PhD, my question is, well, are you looking for life in academia? And sometimes they'll say, well, yeah. And other times they'll say, well, I'm not sure, or not necessarily. And it's like, well, if you're doing something that niche, I think that's where that path is going to lead you. So it's like a hazy, semi-articulated path that I think a lot of people have when they're finishing school. And for me, this is especially true of people who go to film school, I think, or maybe any arts school, right? Like you're kind of in there on a vibe. You like the way things feel or how they look, or maybe you have this vague idea that I want to make a film, or maybe that idea itself is not vague. That's true. I want to make a film. I want to be a director and so on. But the path there is like a placeholder that you have to figure out later. And maybe you don't know that. So what happens is like you finish film school, if that's the path that you choose. And then you go, oh shit, I need to make money now. Like I need to survive, right? And at least when I was studying, it was very like craft centric. We're watching a lot of movies. Every now and then a director that had, gone through my school who's successful in some field or another will come and talk to us. But never did someone from the commercial industry come, So
Was it all feature film then?
Yeah. It was always someone who'd made a feature or like at that point, a show. Mm-hmm. That was like just beginning really. So a lot of people would finish and like they didn't really, it's like, okay, well, what do I do now? Like if you're really on top of your shit, I guess you write a whole feature while you're in school, and then your final year thesis film is like a short film version of it. And if it's really good, you show it at festivals and you try and sell the screenplay and your idea and you say, this is a proof of concept. And then if all the stars aligned, and this is like 0.0001% of people, then maybe you end up making a feature film from that. But the average person is just going to finish and then they're going to say, shit, I don't have any other training. And maybe they end up in like an adjacent industry, like working at like a film fund.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Or maybe they get into advertising, or maybe they just work in hospitality. It's for me, I was fortunate enough while I was in school because I had a photography background, to get on some shoots doing like corporate videos as a cinematographer, as a DP. And so I had some vague sense of like, okay, you can get paid to do these things. And, sounds obvious in hindsight, but that was very helpful. And then, so by the time I finished school, I had like some body of work, right? That wasn't just like my films, but some like shitty corporate videos, or like every now and then I did a few things that were not so shitty and were actually kind of cool. And And then this was in Australia. And then I moved to Hong Kong, and I basically just took all of my cinematography work and I just called it my directing work. Because you can do that when you just totally change markets. Like there's no rules. You just have to do whatever it takes. And I think I moved to Hong Kong with like $2,000 maybe total. Didn't know anybody, didn't have any idea what I was doing. So like you had to make it work basically. So I started working in commercials basically by just like beg, borrow, steal pretty much. And then, a few years go by and like you do a few other things because you're not always getting directing work when you start. You're editing, maybe you're compositing, maybe you're, I don't know, working as like a grip or something on a shoot. But I was mainly editing and every now and then directing something or shooting something for someone else because I could still do that. And then, years go by and that's what you're doing.
Did you have a specific like idea where you want to go, or did you actually like from the start on wanted to go and do feature films or documentary or commercials?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to make features like pretty much everybody that finishes, but I wanted to also live and I wanted to get more experience, and I wanted to work as a director, right? So I started making commercials, and the thing is, you are still referred to as a director, but it is a completely parallel industry. And like comically so, right? Like there's this thing that happens quite often in advertising where you're up for a job, and this is a joke. It's a cliche at this point, but sadly it's still very true. And somebody will say, okay, this is a commercial for like I don't know, T-Mobile or Magenta or something, one of these big carriers. And maybe it's somebody just talking in front of a black cyclorama, right? And you shot plenty of cycloramas, but they weren't black. Maybe one was white or gray. And the agency looking at your work says, well, I see he's done white and gray, but he hasn't done black.
Seriously?
Oh yeah, this happens often. Or like, I don't know, I met a food director when I was in New York who, shoots all the slow motion, chicken being basted and the fries shooting up in the air. And he couldn't get a job because he hadn't done a turkey.
Kind of sounds like a joke.
And it is. It is a joke, but it's true. And it's sadly like, and I get it. I mean, the people who are given these jobs out are very risk averse, right? So for them, it pays to just find someone who's shot the chicken, or the turkey or whatever. Or in my case, the correct color of background screen. So that happens quite often. So you end up like, you start doing jobs and they're fun and you're getting paid and that's great. But to excel, you really have to get into it. You really have to do it. And this thing of like, do they have that specific work on the reel? Doing like a really good and expensive, well-produced 30-second commercial, that person might have an easier shot making a feature film simply from a craft point of view. But the people who are funding the feature films aren't going, okay, well, this is a storyteller who can tell a story very concisely. They're going, but he's got no experience making a feature film. And then on the other side, you can be a feature film director and the commercials will say, yeah, but can he tell a story in 30 seconds? So you get this like weird, bifurcation where it becomes two different worlds. And, you can't like half-ass it in either of them. So, I just kept making commercials because I end up competing with all these people and learning stuff and really enjoying it. And then, so there's no path to like being a director in feature films in commercials. Not really.
How did you make the jump then?
Well, again, like a lot of it is just like luck. Like you have to be like a decent person, I think, and you have to make friends and you have to, obviously you have to have some ability, but like that's not everything, right? In fact, it's a pitiful percentage of what you actually have to have. A lot of it is luck, right? Or people who are like, I don't know, less fatalistic about things will say like, no, it wasn't luck. You were just like really, cool with all these people and eventually it came back to you or something like that. And maybe that's true, but it's also, for me, on my particular feature, the luck part was a combination of circumstances. Like the crypto market was torpedoing, and I was staying with a friend of mine who worked in crypto in Oxford because I was waiting on a visa for Austria to be approved. So I'm hanging out there while the market is collapsing, and I have a vague understanding of what it is, but I'm getting real-time commentary from him, so I'm learning a lot. And in that time, I had done a commercial the previous summer with a producer that I had not worked with before, Stuart Hart, who was ended up being the producer of the feature, who was very close friends with an executive at Bloomberg. And Bloomberg had just decided, we want to make a feature about this thing. They had a new film division, whatever, but it was moving very fast, and they're all like news media people. So they think of things as like breaking story. We have to do it now. Or the people that work for them come from like Vice style journalism, right? They don't, it's kind of like it's a machine. But you can't make a feature like that. It'll look like shit. So they were moving really quickly. He asked Stuart if Stuart could help produce the film. And Stuart said, first thing he asked was like, well, who's the director? And they didn't have an answer for that. It was like, well, we're going to kind of try and do it in-house. We don't really know. And he's like, you can't. That's not going to work. So he said, I worked with this guy last summer, and the commercial that Stuart and I did together got shelved, which happens all the time. Like these companies will spend a lot of money on a thing. It'll be finished, and then someone will decide like maybe the tone is not quite right, or we don't want to put it out. So it's a tax write-off, whatever. This happens often. It's very frustrating. So that had happened with Stuart and I. Like, we got paid. It was fun. Met some new people, whatever. But he remembered that experience, and he really liked what we made. And it was more of like a 4-minute, doc style piece. And he said, actually, I've got a guy in mind who I think would be really good for this. And I had maybe 3 calls with them, and this all happened in 24 hours. And then I got hired to direct the film.
Damn.
So, and it was an interesting process because it was almost total creative control. Like I had to make it about a very specific thing. And, when you make a doc, like, and especially one that had to be done in a year, your access is, of course, can determine everything, right? But that was just dumb luck, really. I still had to deliver, right? I still had to be able to do the work, but you can't plan for that sort of thing. It's just like, it's the right place, right time, Now that's a documentary. Like you don't really just bumble your way into directing a written feature like that, but you do learn something about what it takes to hold someone's attention for 2 hours. Mm-hmm.
Was that a big challenge, or like?
Oh yeah, of course.
Relearning of like storytelling in a longer format?
No, I mean, I think storytelling is storytelling no matter what you do, right? Like, and I think that's something that's deeply human as it is, right? I mean, the reason why so many people have opinions about film and television who don't work in cinema is because you don't need to work in cinema to have an opinion. Like we grow up surrounded with it all the time. Whether you can articulate the grammar or the rules of it, you still have an intuition about what it should be. And also, like, you have your own self and your own instincts to trust. Like, I'm bored by this, or I don't like this to say, or something feels off about this, or, So everybody has that, I think, to some degree or another. And then the rules are still the same. They're still the same even in a 30-second thing. You're still telling a story, right? A good commercial is still telling a story of some sort. It's a simple story. Maybe it's an aphorism or something, but it's still a story. The kind of work that I had been doing up to that point were these like short films that were quasi-doc style. They still had the production value and the vernacular of regular scripted filmmaking. But they were also kind of living in the doc world. Mm-hmm. So those were anywhere from 4 minutes to I think the longest one was 12 or 14, maybe something like that. And that still very much has to have a beginning, middle, and end, and has to hold attention. It has to do certain things, and it has to have certain mechanics at certain points. But the difference is watching down a film that's, I don't know, 7 or 8 minutes. You can watch it a million times until it's just right. But when you're making a film, I mean, the first cut of the feature that we put together was 3 hours and 10 minutes. And it's like, okay, you finish that. You're not watching it down every single time. So you watch it the first time and you think, okay, some things that work, some things that don't work. But it's not like taking notes on a 7 or 8 minute film, because you can cut out 20 minutes of a film that's 3 hours long and change very little about the feeling of the film. It could still feel long, even though you've removed 20 minutes. And then you can take out one tiny scene or one facial reaction or something, and it doesn't create this cascade of feeling. And you watch it down again, 3 hours more or whatever, and you think, I don't feel anything that time. So it's staggeringly difficult, I think. And I have a lot of respect for people who are able to. That's the thing. Anybody who can make a film, who makes a film, deserves a certain amount of respect. Whether you think it was a piece of shit or otherwise, it's like, it's hard. It's really hard. And I didn't realize how hard it was until we finished the first cut. It's like, oh God, this is challenging.
So was the biggest difference in the edit for you?
I mean, yeah, sure. Like, well, look, you also, there's a shooting ratio. I forget what it is exactly. Like, yeah, I'm not even going to hazard the numbers. I'll just give an example of like 20 to 1. So they say you shoot 20 seconds for every 1 second you use, right? That's a shooting ratio. In commercials, you can way overshoot, right? You're certainly shooting many minutes of footage for something that gets cut down to 30 seconds. In feature films, like, you can't shoot 17 weeks of footage for a 90-minute film. That's insane. That just means you had a lot of money, or maybe you just had a lot of time. So yeah, like, you want something to be 90 minutes or 120 minutes. And again, like, the time is totally arbitrary, right? You need as much time as you need to tell a story. But that's a lot of footage. I was like, well, and so you start thinking like, okay, well, I know what's going to go here, and I think I know what's going to go here, and I have got a metaphor that I think I can shoot for this, but you're never feeling like you got enough, right? Like, it's this constant, like, do I have 2 hours of good scenes? And in the end, I think we used just about everything. We even and we even had to go back and reshoot, because it's like, it's a lot of stuff. And also it's about abstruse math, and it's about, I think, topics that are inherently unfilmable. Mm-hmm. So it's like, so yeah, there's this element of like, okay, well, did I get enough stuff? Is the stuff I got good? Is it interesting? And then also I have this edit that has to be a film, and it's going to take a long time, which we don't have. And, we have to like be very sensitive. We have to become viewers and decide, not people who are like emotionally connected to it, but just viewers who can say that was bad, or this is tasteless, or this is shit, or this is boring, or whatever. Yeah, that's hard. It's very hard.
Just for all the people that haven't seen the movie, it's about the FTX collapse and the Sam Bankman Fried story. How do you approach a story like that? Like, just from a creative way? I mean, you have this huge topic. You could approach it from wherever you want. Yeah. How do you approach something like that?
Well, I guess there are two components, right? The first is what happened, right? And what happened at that point was, I think, pretty well cataloged. Like, there's a lot of subtleties that are missing, but it's like, I don't know, it's like if a house burns down, you understand that, all right, well, there was an arsonist and he brought some fuel and he lit a match because this person owed them money or whatever. Like, you have the broad strokes. You don't know the nuances of the relationship, or like maybe it was all insurance fraud or whatever, but you kind of get, all right, I have a basic sense. First, this thing happened. Then this thing happened as a result of the first thing happening. And you continue with that all the way to this guy's in jail now, or he's been arrested or whatever. Actually, he hadn't even been arrested by the time we started, but you got an idea that this is where it's going. So you make an outline, and then to tell this story, you start looking at the outline and you think, well, who do I need to talk to who can tell me about this stuff? All the while you're hoping that, let's say this part of the collapse, I know that this company and this company were involved. So can I speak to people from that company? Will they talk to us? And hopefully they can render that event in a bit more detail. So it has to be more than just your outline, obviously, right? It has to be more than the sum of its parts. So that starts to happen. And then, so you've got this outline, you have this plan. I'm going to go and talk to this guy. He's in Dubai. I'm going to go and talk to this person in the Bahamas. I'm going to try and get some footage here. These people might talk. I'm going to keep talking to them. And you just have a ton of pieces after, I don't know, we shot for maybe 2 months. And then you start to put it together. The other thing is, I wanted some sort of, so that, I guess those are the mechanics, right? And then you also, for me, I was just really fascinated with this man as a person, right? I didn't care so much about whether he did it or obviously he did it, but what his intentions were, because I didn't want to make one of these films that was just a sort of like a morality washing machine where you just throw yourself in this thing. There's like a Bernie Madoff doc that I really didn't like because it was just 90 minutes of going, this is a bad guy. And it's like, what do you do with that? Maybe it's cathartic for people who got ripped off, but I just don't find it interesting. It's more like, let's get in the head of this guy. And his thinking was so foreign and bizarre, but interesting that was more compelling to me. So then the question was, well, how do I create a device that can speak to his humanity? And then also, I don't know, how do we bring something new to the table? How do we give this thing like a bit of a unique look or an edge or something? Because you don't want to just do the same thing again. So how do you tell the story? How do you have empathy and get in this person's head? And then how do you make it look interesting and, cool and compelling?
Do you feel like there's a place for a director's values or personal opinions in a film like that? Or was there for this specific project?
Yeah, to a certain point, I don't think you can totally, let's say the answer is no, there's no place for that, right? Well, then I think you're just a journalist.
Mm-hmm.
And even if the answer is no, some part of you is going to get in there. If you're honest and you're trying really hard, some aspect of you is always going to make it in, right? Even my approach or unwillingness to make something that was just 90 minutes of accusatory language, that's me, right? So, yeah, if filmmaking is considered an art form, then you need to have a point of view, right? You need to have feelings about something. You need to have a vision for your experience of the world. I think very much you need to have those things in a film. I think maybe where the wheels can come off the road a little bit is I went to see a film at the Biennale, the film festival,
Mm-hmm.
and I fucking hated it. I thought it was revolting. I liked the fact that this guy did it, and I think there was many admirable things about it, but it was like watching 90 minutes of propaganda. And it was a documentary, but he put his views and his ideas about the world way up front, and you either decided in that moment that you were along for the ride with him, or like me, you were like, well, no, I'm not, and then you're lost. So it's there's of course a very delicate balance. You want to show someone the world without telling them how to think or feel about it, which I really didn't want to tell people how to think or feel.
Did you watch The Apprentice?
No, I haven't seen that yet. Are you referring to the Donald Trump film?
Yeah.
No, I haven't seen it yet. It's on my list.
Yeah, because they were kind of trying to, I think, be in that spot where they don't like want to like push their opinions in either direction. That's just came to my mind. What was the main idea or feeling you wanted like viewers to take away from Ruin?
Well, for me, I think the most interesting thing about, I mean, there's a lot of interesting things, but the thing that I think brought me in was this guy came from relative obscurity and became worth $32 billion in 2 years, right? I think to make $1 million in 2 years can be somewhat deranging and disorientating, right? To make multiples of that, even more so. But $1 billion is really another, it's hard, I think, I'm saying this like I have $1 billion and I don't, obviously, but I think it's a level of abstraction that I think people don't really have an intuition about. Like, it's an obscene amount of money, $1 billion, right? And he made 32 multiples of that in 2 years. And I think, and became like enormously famous and well known, and is all of a sudden having very powerful people call him directly, and he's going to Congress, and has all these people on his speed dial, and I think there's something about that is really interesting. Like, everybody likes to think that they would not be X, Y, or Z, but then when you get into that situation, then you really find out, like, oh, I guess it's like this classic, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely, and so on. You ask most people, you're in a position of power now, are you going to be a benevolent dictator, for instance? Most people would say, yeah, because I'm a good person. I have morality, blah, blah, blah. I have a North Star of some sort. That's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. Those are the most dangerous people in a way, because they are naive about their own nature. And I think that it is a dangerous thing for any person to get into, and it does corrupt you in some way or another. And this guy was very much involved in these, I guess, at least optically altruistic movements, and he maintained that for the duration, even to this day. And I'm not saying I'm not giving a value judgment about those one way or the other, but the idea that this guy could come from obscurity and be skyrocketed to this place, I was curious what that would do to a person, and then for it to come crashing down almost as quickly, that's something. So there was this idea of creating the diary of the like craziest time of my life kind of thing. I wanted people to feel some sense of like this meteoric rise, and then and also like how I think disassociating that might feel, how surreal that might feel. That was our visual technique. This is why we used a ton of AI. It was supposed to feel surreal. We shot a lot of it on 16 millimeter on a Bolex to give it a kind of a nostalgic, but also slightly disassociated feel. Like, I have these memories, but I don't remember how I felt, kind of thing. We shot things on Polaroids, and then we shot pictures of the Polaroids. We took news archive footage and shot it through a CRT screen. Stuff like that, just to add one level of abstraction so that you felt as though you were watching someone else's memory as this thing was happening. Were we successful? I don't know. When I look at this film now, it's like, it's fine. It's fine. Is it a good film? I don't think so. But it is what it is. Like, I tried my hardest based on the abilities I had at the time, and
what would you do? Would you have done differently now, looking back?
I think it's a very produced film, and I think that all of us who made it. I worked with a lot of the collaborators that I work with in the commercial world, and it was all of our first film. And I think that what it takes to create something that is going to hold attention, is going to be interesting. We really threw everything at it, and maybe we threw too much at it, but we didn't. We did the best that we could at the time. The other thing is, it could only be as good as the people that we were able to get, and Bloomberg's job was to source the people, basically. amongst many other things, but that was something that they were responsible for. So, I had a call with Sam Bankman Fried. He found out about the film and he wanted to talk to me and decide whether or not he was going to do the film. Now, that would have been a very different thing if he would have gotten involved personally. He got arrested, I think, before he could, or his bail was rescinded before he could commit to that, one way or the other. I think he actually, it was between me and one other director, and he ended up going with her. This doesn't matter, of course, because he didn't go with anyone in the end. But yeah, like if you're making a doc and you have 1 year to make it, some docs 5, 6, 7 years. I mean, it does come down to the quality of the interviews you can get. Also, like the amount of restraint you have. We didn't have a lot of restraint. We kind of just went for it. I think it's a wildly entertaining doc, and I think that like we wanted to make it for someone who didn't know anything about crypto, who could just sit down and watch this thing and be sucked right into it.
I think you achieved that, though.
I think so.
It was like entertaining. It was educational.
Like my mom really enjoyed it.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And she doesn't like any of my work. So like she's a very unsophisticated cinema goer, and that's fine. But that's kind of what I was going for this one. Mm-hmm. So like, yeah, it's not necessarily the same. If I had to make it again, would I do? Maybe I would have done some of the things again, but it was an education.
Was there any like specific thing that happened that kind of like surprised you during the whole production?
I mean, a lot of it was a surprise. We had to balance constantly the need to be reactive, right? Like maybe we were hanging around for one particular interview for quite some time, and this guy did not come through in the end. But he kept us going for a long time, right? So huge. I had reserved in my head a place for this guy and his story to go. Like, this is going to explain this beat of the film. And then it doesn't come through. So it's like, all right, well, I need that beat of the story explained. How do I fill in the gap here? What do I do? So that's not ideal, right? Because you don't have a plan, or rather you don't have a plan B. And you have to come up with one. You have no choice, and you don't have a lot of time, and maybe you're running out of money. So yeah, that was always a surprise. I didn't think about that sort of stuff when I started. It's an obvious thing when I say it now, but it's like there's so many things that you're thinking about. It's such a complex machine that you can't think of it all. Only when you're done can you think of it all. But yeah, I think just the dynamic nature of the production and how adaptable you had to be was, I found, surprising, and but also like thrilling. So
I can imagine for sure. Did you feel some kind of like pressure? Because I mean, like kind of stories that really kind of unfold in real time, like all the big networks or like companies or whatever are like rushing to get out the first story. And I've just heard from another producer, they were doing a story about the blockchain. No, what was it called? GameStop story. And they were kind of like rushing and like trying to fight off Netflix or something for like whoever would be able to publish first, because the other like network had to like postpone for half a year or whatever to be relevant again. Did you have that feeling as well?
Of course. I mean, that was drummed into us from the beginning. When we started the doc, it was a real like who's who of who's making this film. I mean, and the names and the companies that were coming out with their own projects was extremely intimidating. It was a lot of people. And, big papers were breaking new names every week. Oh, Apple's throwing all this money behind this particular person, or, Vice is doing their project or whatever. There were a lot of horses that came out of the gate. But as time went on, they just started to drop off because either they couldn't get access or they didn't have an angle, or, like we had a pretty good head start. And also Bloomberg, the advantage of doing a film like this with Bloomberg is like they have respect and they have deep connections with basically everyone. So, and I think that a lot of people who wanted to make this film, like your average documentarian, they didn't have these relationships. And which I guess that was maybe another surprise, is like, you think that people are going to give a shit when you tell them you're making a film about something and they're going to want to talk to you, but it's like, there's literally no upside. There's none.
Sure, yeah.
You're not getting paid.
Yeah.
And I come from the world where I don't care about paying someone. I don't care about paying for a thing. I don't even care if it's accurate, because I want to tell a story. And if I have to rearrange someone's apartment to show how they live, even though they don't live that way, it's like, that's not what it's about. Whereas when you're doing a project like this for Bloomberg, there is a degree of veracity that is very important. So you can't, I didn't have the same liberties that I would have liked, which, I mean, this is a good thing. It's a documentary. But one of them was like, you cannot pay participants because they could be seen as compromised. I personally think that that's, I don't agree with that, because you're still asking someone to be part of your money-making project, to go out of their way, to put themselves in risk, even just like travel expenses, it's like, I have no problem with that. But we could not do that. So that made things challenging. And I think it also, like, yeah, it was, I don't know, it was just another parameter that we had to deal with. I'll be honest with you, I lost where I was going with that.
It was all about like just the pressure of like being the first to publish.
Oh, right. Yeah. Sorry. Of course. So
No worries.
yeah, okay. So so getting people to be a part of your project when, you can't pay them anything, and you can't, like, they have to speak about their industry, and maybe they have to upset someone or not upset someone, or like, the people who are going to decide to be a part of a doc always have an angle of some sort, right? Always. So you are paying them in a way. You're just not paying them in coin that came from your account. You're paying them in a different kind of coin. That's why I think it's kind of bullshit. But yeah, like, so you have to balance the agenda of the people who decide to speak. Maybe their intention is to clear their name, or maybe their intention is to position themselves as a guru, or maybe their angle is to hawk their products in a subtle way or something like that.
How do you manage to like keep those, like, or their interests aligned with what you're trying to tell as a director?
Well, you've got the edit, and also you have to, you can't take what they're saying out of context, but like, it's my job to steer it in the direction that I want to go or am curious about. So, you might speak to someone for 3 hours, but you only get 5 minutes of useful answers. So yeah, these other projects fell off, I think, because they ran into these issues. Like, they didn't have the relationships and they couldn't get the people. And in the end, I mean, there were a few other films that were rushed out. They were terrible. Yeah, I can honestly say that all the other ones that came out were quite bad, but they came out first and earlier. We came out last. But yeah, that was intimidating initially. And then as I got into it, I didn't even have time to think about it. They were pressuring us pretty hard. Like, hey, we got to finish this. We got to finish this. But I mean, it's a big beast. It takes time.
For sure. Do you see yourself more of a documentary style director?
No. I realized that as I was going, like, there are aspects of it I enjoy. I am deeply curious about other people. And I think I'm an okay interviewer, and I do enjoy speaking to people. Like, when I'm sitting down with some of these people, I am genuinely curious about them. And I think that can facilitate a good interview, because, like, it is more like conversational style, and I think you'll get more interesting answers, and you might even get away from talking points that they've already, especially if they're very media trained, they already know what they're going to say, and you've got to really knock them off of that, and it's hard, and that's part of the art. But I don't like the constraints. I don't like it's like someone who is very good at taking monochromatic photos, or maybe paints monochromatically. I just like having the full arsenal, right? And the other thing I realized, and this is, of course, like, this is a strongish opinion of mine that not everyone will share, but like, there's nothing noble or virtuous or I think there's no inherent utility to a documentary that differentiates it from just watching any other entertaining piece of media. It's like, I think sometimes people like to say like, no, I'm just watching documentaries these days. Like, all right, cool, great. But it's like, you're just entertaining yourself for 90 minutes. And I think that like, I don't know, for some reason my mind is going to the act of killing. This Josh Oppenheimer film about the Indonesian ethnic cleansing that happened.
Mm-hmm.
That was an incredible film, very powerful. And I'm happy I watched it, but I'm not sure what I was supposed to do with that. Like, what's my ethnic cleansing is bad. Okay. And this is no knock on the film. This is more a broader statement on documentaries in general. It's like, did you enjoy it? Was it a good story? Does it give you some piece that you can take with you to live your life? Yes. I don't like the idea of like activism documentary making because I don't think it's effective. I think people want to be entertained and they want to hear a good story and if the idea is to, I don't know, do some social engineering, you could do the same thing with making a good narrative film that is inspiring and maybe helps people see the world in a different way. If that's what they want, it doesn't matter really. Like, just make something that's interesting and honest. So I realized making this, like, I'm not a documentary guy. And I'm not a documentary guy because I know lots of documentary guys and I respect them a lot. And they have the discipline and the restraint and I think the deep interest in a topic to stick with it for a very long time. Whereas like, I want to have people acting and I want to fake scenes and I want to just like, it's just more what I find compelling.
How much do you like, or how do you approach like in other projects? How much like guidance do you give your subjects on like what do you see in your head to like get them to do or like get them to where you envision the whole story?
Well, it depends. Like, are we talking about like a quasi doc looking thing or is this like a scripted thing?
Kind of like what you would prefer to do, I guess, like in an ideal scenario.
Yeah. I quite enjoy doing scripted work.
Yeah.
I treat a lot of the non-scripted work that I do, if you look on my website, like scripted work, because when you make a commercial, you have a very tight storyboard. It's expensive. Some of the stuff is very complicated. You have to work it out ahead of time, and you need to make sure you're covered. And you need to make also the people who are paying for it feel good about the fact that their money's going somewhere and they can see something ahead of time and whatever. So I quite enjoy that as an approach. And you don't want to feel completely hemmed in by like having everything thought out ahead of time. Like, I don't enjoy that. I think there's a certain amount of quality and value and like dynamism that you're going to discover in the moment that you're making something. Which actually is really beautiful about documentary making is like, it is 100% that. But ultimately it's like, do you just, I guess the metaphor maybe would be a jam band musician versus like a composer or something. Like, I like to jam. I think it's great. I like to write stuff as well. And,
see,
a few more rules.
Yeah. So you're kind of like trying to have a quite like final idea of where you want to go beforehand, then trying to get close to that with like still being open to some kind of like improvisation.
Yeah. I mean, and you can do that with so-called scripted narrative, right? I mean, I think that's what a lot of like mumblecore films were. It's like a vibe and a loose story outline, and then a lot of it is improv. It's like, is this getting in the direction I want to go in? Does this feel good? Is this honest to the characters that I wrote, etc.? And there's ways of working that I think are a little bit more improvisational, which I quite enjoy, within the confines of like a hammered out story that you want to tell.
How do you approach characters or character development? Because I think that's always a very interesting like aspect of like, do you see growth in your character? How do you like envision them in your like creative phase before, or like how do you say it?
How do I create character arcs, or what's my approach to
kind
that?
of like kind of like how you approach your like or how you like develop the characters themselves first and then character arch exactly. Yeah.
So I'm writing a film right now, a feature film that is entirely scripted, and it's extremely challenging, and it's what I spend most of my day doing. And you need a character that changes or experiences something that makes them change for it to be a story, right? Otherwise, it's like an anecdote or something. Or at least I do. I don't know. I'm just thinking, there's always counterexamples, right? But like, I like stories that show some change in a character. I think those are the most satisfying ones.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Right. And I think like fundamentally, that's probably what the human tradition of storytelling is about. It's like, it's proverbial and it's right. Like, here's why we do the things we do because they create these outcomes or whatever. Right. Just describing early religion. That's kind of what storytelling, I think, was the basis of in many ways. And so I guess with this project and with some of the short films that I've done, you have to make the character first and you have to know everything about them, how this person will respond in this situation, what they like, what they don't like, what their sense of humor is. Do they have a sense of humor? Are they angry? Are they not angry? Is that a problem? Like, you have to get those things pretty dialed, I think, to make a compelling character.
Into how much detail do you go there?
As much as I can. Like, as much as I can. I mean, to avoid that process, I think you do at your own peril, because I think that we like to know someone, right? Like you like to get a sense of someone, right? That I think that is maybe one of the things that we do to, like, when I say we, like human beings do to feel safe, is like you need to make a psych profile of someone. I think you're constantly doing it, right?
For sure, yeah.
That's how you know them, and that's how you know, if I tell a joke, are they going to go do this thing? Or if I'm late, are they going to respond in this way? Or if I, like, you know, maybe we're wrestling or something, is it going to get too aggressive? Like, you have some idea of the person. This is trust. This is knowing someone. And I think that a fun experience for anyone watching a film is to know the character in the same way that they know a friend, because you have some idea of how they're going to respond in a situation. It makes them feel real, it makes them feel rendered. And in order to do that, I mean, you have to figure out those things, or you have to figure it out with the actor that's playing them. Like, a lot of actors do their own work in this field. They create a dossier. They write lore about their character so that they're not acting like someone who would never act that way in a situation, right? They have to be consistent. I think that's just making a good film.
How much, like, freedom do you give the actors you're working with in, like, developing the character, or like making the character more into their person themselves?
Well, with everyone that I collaborate with, I like to give them all the freedom, but you still have to choose what parts you use, right? Like, a good, I guess, analogy is like musicians use, when you're writing music and you bring in a session player, right? Like, you did the keyboard section yourself in the studio, but you're like an okay keyboardist, but you have this amazing keyboardist you bring in, and he's listening to all the stems without the keys, and he's riffing, he's playing, or she's playing, and you do, 6-7 takes, you just keep going, and it's a different interpretation every time. And then later, when the person is creating the song, they're taking snippets from each take. I really like this section, I like this section, I like this section. And it's your job as a director to do that later. Like, you still have to make sure you're getting what you need, what you know you need. But I think it's great to work with people who you have very similar taste with, whose ideas you like, so that you don't have to exercise that kind of control, or a lot of that kind of control. And I think also it frees them up to listen to their instincts. And, like, I mean, that's ultimately what you're hiring people for, is their instincts. So they get to bring something to the table rather than just keep trying to, like, there are some there are some directors that do things very didactically, very didactically is not the word, very pedantically, I would say. They have a very specific vision, and sometimes like it's I don't know. P.T. Anderson comes to mind, right? I think he's currently living. He's like the greatest American filmmaker, and his scripts are very precise and very particular. So are Tarantino's, right? Like he has a very specific idea of where he wants these characters to go, very specific ideas about the story, and his vision. Both their visions are so, I think, clear and rendered that they know whether they're getting what they want or not. I don't have it to that degree. I wish I did. That would be amazing, but I don't. I just don't. I know it when I see it, but I don't have, it doesn't come to me in a vision and then I just write it all down. It's like, I think I'm like 70 to 80% of the way there. Like I know I'll know it when I see it. So feel free to bring as much as you want to this character because we're going to get there together. It's that kind of a thing.
That's a big part, though. I mean, having the understanding of, or like trusting your gut on like knowing what feels right.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think it's everything, right? I don't know what else you're supposed to go by if it's not your instincts as a creator. I mean,
for sure. How much of the story is built before filming, during filming, or in the edit for you?
For me?
Yeah.
Personally, I mean, it's because that's a very different question for a lot of people, but well, if you're working off of a script, theoretically, the story's already built. But that doesn't mean that everything that you wrote is going to work, right? Sometimes you put a scene together as you wrote it, and you look at it, and you feel nothing, right? Like that happens. So you have to figure out whether you need to shoot again or whether you can make something with what you have and still maintain the intention that you had in making the scene. But I don't know, maybe you have to cut a reaction, or maybe there's a line of dialogue that doesn't work, or maybe you have to cut the whole thing altogether. So, the idea is that you go and you do these things with a plan, but the plan doesn't always work. So
where do you go for inspiration for a new story, for example? I mean, is it personal experience? Is it something you read somewhere, or just conversations? Or how do you start or get the idea or like inspiration for a tool a new story?
Oh, I don't know. You just have to live your life, right? Like I read things that I find interesting. I watch things I find interesting. I have conversations with people that I think are interesting, and I listen to music and look at art, and I think you have to assemble a very like fertile garden, right? I think you never quite know what's going to grow out of it, but you have to take care of the soil. I'm mixing metaphors here, but like you have to feed yourself stuff all the time. And ideally, that's what you do. That's what you enjoy. It's what I enjoy. Constantly taking stuff in, but you don't know what your mind is going to do with it. Because when you have an idea, it's really just a synthesis of maybe two incongruent things, or I don't know. I don't even know what they are, but like there's something, right? Like, oh, I think that this is an interesting profession that's so niche and I've never heard of it. And what if this happened to that person? It's the most immediate one. I was listening to an interview with Tony Gilroy not too long ago. And for those of you who don't know who that is, he is a writer and a director. He's written tons of films. I think he's probably most famous for writing the Bourne series, the Jason Bourne series, and for the film Michael Clayton, where George Clooney is a fixer at a law firm, and he made Andor as well. I think the only redeemable Disney Star Wars that was ever created. And I actually thought that the writing was so good in Andor, and maybe that was in relief against all of the other shitty writing that they've had, but I just wanted to know more. And I found an interview with him where he's talking about Michael Clayton in particular, and his approach to writing, which I think is quite compelling, is you have to start with a very simple kernel. And for that film, it was a fixer at a law firm. Like, what did they do? You know, I didn't even know that they had these people. Like, I know that they have a lot of money and they have a lot of power, and sometimes you need people who know how to swim in various currents. But that was the current. I'm sorry, that was the kernel. Fixer at a law firm. And then he says, and then you need to have like a DNA scene where this character has an interaction that exemplifies the theme of the film or something. And for him, and so he plays the scene, which is one of the first scenes of the film, where George Clooney has to rush upstate in New York to give legal counsel to a guy who's just done a hit and run. And he said he wrote this scene without any plans for a film. It was just like, this is an interesting character. This is an interesting setup. He wrote that scene. He really liked it. And then he put it away for years. He just kept that scene, but he really liked it. He kept coming back to it. And then that became like the DNA scene. And he kind of used it as like a North Star for building every other scene afterwards until he wrote a film. But the basis for that is fixer at a law firm, right? Like that's very simple. It's not a story. It's just an idea. It's a kernel. It's something. And I think that's what you are looking for all day. Those little things like, what about this? Or, you know, and that comes from your interest as a person, I think.
Yeah. Just being a curious person, like picking up all the things you surround yourself with. Kind of like slowly wrapping up. You just like finished your feature, I don't know, how long was it ago? 1 year ago?
Yeah, 1 year ago.
So how's life like after a big project like that? Or how do you go like onwards from a big project like that?
Well, I got right back to making commercials. I mean, it was nice also to do something like the first shoot that I did after finishing that film was just a 1-day shoot. It's great. I wasn't even involved in the edit. I showed up, I directed the thing, and I flew home, and that was great. It was a nice like palate cleanser, but I've made a feature now, right? And that does change things a bit, like in subtle ways, you know. It's definitely with some sort of like baptism by fire, I guess. And I think professionally, it's been helpful. I mean, when I'm up for jobs now, they certainly like the fact that I've made a feature. It gives me a bit more gravitas, a bit more of a serious person, I guess. But it also, this is a much broader topic, but like, it has a longer shelf life directing films than being in commercials. Like, you need to be fluent in culture, current culture, when you're making commercials. Sure. And like, you do age out. I mean, you really do age out. And whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, it happens. Because you are constantly like a cipher for trends, you know, visually or just zeitgeist. And at least if you're making films, you're telling something that theoretically should be beyond that, or just not a part of it. You should be making something that is a little bit more timeless or universal, or I guess personal, which should negate those trends, or, you know, whether you embrace them or not. So I took some time off from like my own projects, whatever they were, to just, you know, make commercials and enjoy myself and even just have some downtime. And then you start making the next one.
So you're working now on your next feature, just writing everything yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not a whole script. I think I've been told by other feature directors that I know that it's better to make an outline and a pitch deck and blah, 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 so you can see if you can get people behind it before you go through the arduous process of writing a script, which is like a very long and punishing thing. So yeah, theoretically, like, you move forward, you just keep doing it, you know?
What is the time frame for a new project like that?
I think, honestly, it's as much time as you give it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I could, with no one calling me to ask me how it's going, and I have someone calling me every week on Thursday, my producer, and we talk, and having that accountability is, I think, very important, because it forces you to, like, I think people have this idea that you need to wait around until you feel inspired to make something. But in my experience, and maybe this is the best, like, lesson of working as, like, a commercial artist, is that no one gives a shit, right? You have to come up with ideas. Like, if I get boards for a commercial and I have 3 days to write a treatment, it doesn't matter if I don't have, like, you have to produce it. You have to make something. It has to come out. And it always does. It always does, simply because you need to deliver. That's it. So yeah, like, when you have something really special in your head, and you need more time, okay, that's a real thing. But a lot of the time, it's like, I mean, I'm starting from the same place as this Michael Clayton. It's like, I have a kernel and I have a scene or two, and I have a vague sense of beginning, middle, and end, and I know where I want this to go. But I could dick around with that forever until it was just right. Instead, I have someone saying, I want this treatment done ASAP so that we can start, finding funding and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, all right, well, sit down every day. And many of those days, like, I feel terrible, because it's like, it's demoralizing writing. Like, I there's plenty of people who I think really enjoy it, maybe, but for me at least, it's a painful process, because you're coming face to face with your inadequacies as a creator. It's like, wow, I'm probably not smart enough to make this. I'm probably not talented enough to make this. I don't know enough. But really, what you're looking at when you're looking at a finished thing is this tapestry that has layers and layers and layers upon it. It wasn't something that was just, spit out in a single, moment. You're looking at a tapestry, but what you're making is layers. You're making a layer a day. And sometimes you're not even at that opening stage where you're just like making, little strips of paper mache on the floor. You have nothing that even resembles something impressive or even something worth sharing with someone else. That part sucks. But I've learned over time that, like, you just have to sit there and be uncomfortable and feel bad or feel good or whatever, because it's your job. Mm-hmm. And by forcing yourself to do that and being accountable to somebody for time, you're going to make something. And then the time comes where you're like, this is awesome, or I feel strongly about it. I know where it needs to go. I need a little bit more time to take it there. That's when time is important. But that initial thing where you're just like laying the foundation, it's like, come on, you'll get it out because you're forced to. Here's your time limit. So,
do you feel pressured to produce the next feature? Or is it more an intrinsic, like, motivation that you actually, like, want to do more of that, like, now?
Well, any pressure that I feel, yeah, of course. Like, like, I've literally got someone giving me pressure every week, but I want it to be good, right? Like, I want to make something that people will enjoy and that I enjoyed, like something that I would want to watch, which is, I think, where you have to start with a lot of this stuff. And yeah, also, like, some degree of pressure, because I think the window perhaps for doing this, at least in the way that we do it now, is closing pretty quickly. I am pretty well versed in all of the visual developments in AI because that's part of my job. And I am not so sanguine about where that's going or how many of us are going to have jobs as a result of that. There's many people who say, yeah, but it looks this, or it's not good enough here, or give it time. It's coming. It's coming. Not today, maybe not next year, but like maybe the year after, maybe next year even. I'm not sure. I feel like doing something long form, has a little bit more protection. You still have to come up with a story, right? AI generated stories are generally pretty garbage, but the visual tools are getting pretty strong. So that feels a little bit more to me like, I don't want to say future proofing because I don't even think there's such thing as that anymore, but taking myself in a direction that is a bit more, I think has a bit more legs, a bit more future, and it's also something I really like to do.
So you feel like AI is going to disrupt the whole film industry as well in just a couple of years? Because I feel like most people think that the like photo industry is going to be disrupted first, like, and most people are thinking like 1, 5, 2, 5, 10 years or something. But your opinion is that it's coming way quicker for the moving image industry as well.
Yeah, I mean, in the last year alone, it's been pretty exponential. I mean, if you look at what we used for my film, we used Midjourney to make stills. We used Stable Diffusion to make animated sequences. We used Gen 1. We used Runway. We used DID. These were all like very nascent tools. How far, and you know what the funny thing is, like, they were developing rapidly even as we were using them. Like, we were going back and remaking stuff because it got much better. How much things have changed in a single year is astonishing. Like, we would have had a very different approach to making that film if we were making it today, like profoundly different. So yeah, it's gonna come pretty quickly. And the other thing is, for many people and for many like decision makers and companies, good enough is enough.
Oh yeah. Especially in the commercial industry, I feel like.
When the price tag, when you're comparing the price tag of the two, and this one is whatever you spent someone to, do prompt engineering versus this multi-million-dollar shoot to go and make this thing. And you look at the product of the two and you're like, well, this one's objectively better, but this one is fine. That's a lot of decision makers will look at that and they'll look at the money and they'll say, this one's fine.
Sure, that's
or
true.
they'll lean into like the slop element of it and just make something kind of weird and surreal, and that's fine too. That's another visual language that'll evolve. But yeah, the writing's on the wall. I think anybody who's not thinking seriously about that now is going to have a pretty rude wake up call.
I bet, yeah. I feel like we could talk on forever. There would be so many more topics, but we kind of have to close up. Yeah. I always ask the same 2 questions to wrap up the show. Mm-hmm. First is one like thing you're kind of struggling with in your creative work right now, and one thing that you're kind of really passionate about in your creative work right at the moment.
Well, I guess the answer is both of those things. I'm sorry, this is exactly what we were talking about. Like, I find, so struggle-wise, it's having maybe too much information about what you're doing and about who's done it before and about where you fit into the landscape of that. That's always a challenge, right? Like, what I'm writing about is in the realm of AI. And, that's a weighty topic. And it's confronting and, psychically, emotionally, spiritually confronting to make something like that. And to think for a moment that it could be good, or it's just going to be just ridiculous. Like, it's stupid, but I think about a review at the moment and someone calling it, I don't know, sophistry or philosophically half-baked or just like dog shit, like that will be challenging, right? And that's like an aspirational thing to be upset about, wow, I'm reading a review of a finished product or something, who knows if it'll ever even see the light of day, or I'll finish it. So that's hard. But something I'm very excited about is that, like, topically, I mean, that is potentially like the most revolutionary thing humanity has created. And I find it enormously exciting, and the potential of it exciting and terrifying at the same time, but creatively quite a fertile ground, quite rich. So anxious and worried about place in the world, quite excited about ability to define that place in the world.
Yeah, that sounds like really makes a lot of sense. Sounds very interesting for sure.
Same coin, different size.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm super excited to see what you come up with and like where the whole story takes you.
Me too.
I bet. Thank you so much for taking the time and speaking to me.
My pleasure.
Super interesting. And
Also,
all right.
Yeah, rocking.
Thanks. Well, that was my episode with Shern. I thought it was super interesting. Hope there was something in there for you as well. If you like this episode, make sure to give it a 5-star review and follow the podcast to stay up to date. If you want, you can also just share it on Instagram to give it an extra push. Well, thank you so much to Shern for taking your time and talking to me. And at the end, as always, thank you so much to Male Kolumne for the amazing cover and Belinda Thaler for the jingle. All right, talk to you next week. Bye.